It's Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces against the young phenom Vincent Keymer. We've got a blitz showdown with an English opening setting the stage for a deep strategic battle. A very symmetrical start as both players develop their knights. After a quiet setup move from Magnus, Keymer immediately challenges the center with the classic pawn break to d5, and Carlsen accepts the challenge as his pawn takes on d5, clarifying the central tension immediately. Keymer recaptures with the knight to d5, and this is an excellent move. In fact, it's the only move that keeps the position in balance for black, setting up ideas of winning a pawn down the line, and Magnus uncorks a brilliant response. Queen to c2, a sound sacrifice to keep the pressure on and challenge black's entire setup. The idea is this: after bishop to e6, white plays pawn to e3, bishop to e7 follows, and now pawn to b4 keeps the game perfectly equal. The knights are traded off on c3, and both sides get on with development. Keymer's bishop comes to d6, Magnus fianchettos his own, and both kings are safely castled away. The middle game begins. Keymer's knight hops out to a5, looking for queenside pressure, and the pawns lock horns in the center. Black now pushes the f-pawn, staking his claim on the kingside, but here's a passive move from the world champion. The knight drops all the way back to b1, an inaccuracy that hands the edge to Keymer. Much better was bishop to b2 to control the long diagonal. Black could have punished this with an immediate pawn to f4. The pieces continue to dance around the board. Both sides reposition their rooks, and Keymer's knight finds a beautiful outpost, landing on d4, where it controls key squares. Oh, but Keymer pushes his pawn to f4, and that's a mistake. He gives the advantage right back. The quieter pawn to b6 was better, but now Magnus can punish by playing pawn to e3, ripping open the center for his own pieces. Magnus does exactly that, pushing to e3. Keymer has no choice but to capture, and the f-file is suddenly wide open. And pawn takes e3 is a brilliant recapture from Carlsen. A fantastic sacrifice because the point is, after the rooks are exchanged on f1, bishop to d5 comes with check, and that simply wins a pawn. The rooks are indeed traded on f1, with the white queen recapturing and keeping an eye on the kingside. And now look at this monster bishop pair for Magnus. He brings the bishop to d5 with check, and then the other one to b2, slicing across the board and building immense pressure. Another brilliant move. Rook to f1. Magnus offers to trade the final pair of rooks, knowing that simplifying into the resulting endgame gives him a completely dominant position. The rooks come off the board, and we are now in a queen and minor piece endgame where white's pieces are far superior. Carlsen's queen and knight begin to coordinate beautifully, probing black's position for a decisive entry point. Keymer is under immense pressure, and here he cracks, making a critical mistake that should lose the game on the spot. A better defense was available, bishop to e7 was necessary, and after pawn to g4, queen to f8, queen to g3, and queen to d8, black is still holding on. But in the game, he plays bishop to c7, and this just walks into a devastating tactic. White could have played knight to f6 immediately, and after the pawn takes, queen takes f6 is check, and the attack is unstoppable. What a shocker! With a completely winning position on the board, Magnus Carlsen blunders it all away. He had a forced win right here. The winning move was knight to f6. Pawn must take the knight, then queen takes f6 is check. The king moves to h7, and bishop to f7 seals the deal. It's completely over. But incredibly, back in the game, Magnus plays the knight to f2. A massive blunder that throws away the entire advantage, and suddenly the game is nearly equal again. After that huge missed opportunity, Carlsen has to regroup. He starts a new plan, advancing his g-pawn to pry open the black kingside and reignite his attack. The queens shuffle around, with white's queen landing on g3, staring directly at the vulnerable black king. And knight to f6 is another inaccuracy from Keymer. This allows white's g-pawn to march forward with tempo and regain a clear advantage. Instead, knight to g5 was a much tougher defense. Now, Magnus can push pawn to g5 and win a piece. And there it is. Pawn to g5 from Carlsen. Black captures and white's queen recaptures, blowing open the files around the enemy king. Under attack, Keymer makes another slip, and this one allows white to force a winning endgame. There was a much better defense. The best move was queen to f7, and after bishop to g6, queen to e6, pawn to h4, and bishop to e8, black is still fighting. But instead, Keymer plays queen to h5, and this just loses. White can now force a queen trade and follow up with a simple knight fork to win a pawn. And Carlsen sees it. Queen takes queen on h5 with check. The perfect move, correctly liquidating into a knight and bishop endgame where he is now simply up a pawn and completely winning. Keymer has to recapture with the knight on h5, but the damage is already done. He's fighting a lost cause. White's knight leaps into the powerful g4 square, immediately preparing to attack black's weak pawns, and the pawn pushes to e4, but this just creates more weaknesses in black's crumbling position. A better defensive try was available. Knight to f6, knight takes pawn on e5, bishop to e8, king to f2, bishop to h5, but after the pawn push, pawn to e4 simply damages the structure further. Now, Magnus can play bishop to g6, and he's on his way to winning another pawn. There's the bishop to g6, a monster piece that completely dominates the board and puts even more pressure on black. Keymer captures the pawn on d3, but this doesn't solve any of his problems. In fact, it just simplifies into an even worse position, as white can now play bishop takes h5 and win a piece. Carlsen does indeed take the knight on h5, and while this is still completely winning, it's a slight inaccuracy. Black could have created some tricky problems with bishop to f3, which would have won a pawn back. Keymer plays bishop to f3, but misses the critical moment. This allows white to play bishop to c3, and now the win is absolutely straightforward again. The chance for counterplay is gone, and from here it's a masterclass in conversion from Magnus. He methodically tightens the net, improving his king position and activating his bishops, leaving black with no moves. White's bishop lands on d5, and after black's desperate pawn push, the position has completely collapsed. A wild and complex blitz game full of brilliant moments, shocking blunders, and a relentless will to win from both sides. In the end, Carlsen's pressure was just too much, and with his position in tatters and down material, he secures the victory.